Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Tuesday tip, where in this video we're going to be talking about a very simple, fast, and easy way to make your BMX brakes better with just one thing. So if you watched my BMX brake check, which was my last video and linked in the description and in the corner somewhere here, I went from the front to the back on my bike talking about all of the different brake tricks that I use to make them better, more efficient, and make the cables last longer. And when I got to the end of that video, I talked about something to do with the brake pads that makes the brakes work better, but I couldn't remember the logic behind it. And to be completely honest, I remembered the logic behind it, and the furthest I can explain it is that it's leverage. And what we're talking about here is using the thicker brake pad spacers in order to get more distance between the brake arm and the rim. So as you can see here, we've got two different size spacers on either side of where the brake arm would go. Right here we have the bigger spacer, which would be on the inside, and the thinner spacer, which would be on the outside. With this bigger spacer between the brake arm and the brake pad itself, we have more distance between the brake arm and the rim on the bike. And what this greater distance from the brake arm to the rim does is gives us more leverage whenever we're pulling the brakes. And this is a concept that I can vaguely understand but couldn't completely wrap my head around, so I hit up my friend Patrick Kelly, who is a science teacher, a science YouTuber, and a fellow brake rider, and I asked him if he would be willing to do a collaboration and talk about this concept scientifically in his own way to maybe help you guys understand what's actually going on here. So let's cut right to Patrick's explanation.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Patrick. Brant actually has a pretty good idea behind his little spacer trick. He's saying that the bigger spacer between the brake arm and the rim is going to increase the performance of his brakes. And this trick works because he's increasing friction. And friction is really only two things: the coefficient of friction times the normal force. The bigger that either of those gets, the bigger the friction force and the bigger the stopping power of his brakes. Alright, so the coefficient of friction depends on the materials used. A plastic peg on a waxed ledge is going to have a low coefficient of friction. Rubber brake pads on a chrome rim is going to have a high coefficient of friction. That's also why different brake pads come in different colors. They're different coefficient of friction for whatever your brake needs are. But the spacer is there so that he can maximize the normal force. To get the greatest normal force, we need to make sure that the brake pad is hitting as perpendicular to the rim as possible. Rather, we need to make sure that the tangent of the force produced by the brake arm is hitting the rim at 90 degrees. And I'm guessing you didn't come to this video for some math, so instead, here's an analogy. If you're trying to hit a baseball as far as you can, you want to make sure that that point of contact between the ball and the bat happens at a 90-degree direction to the pitch. You're wasting the force that you generated from the swing if you hit it here or here. It's the same concept with brakes. You want the pull to hit as close to 90 degrees as possible, and that's what Brant's spacer does. It puts the brake pad in the position to hit the rim straight on. On the flip side, the thin spacer wastes a lot of the force that you created. Even if you towed your brake pad perfectly to be completely parallel with the rim, it's still coming in at a little bit more of an angle. The farther you get from perfect, the more energy is going in that direction instead of directly into stopping the rim. While it might not be a ton of force that's conserved, everything in Brant's bike seems optimized for braking power, and this works. If y'all have any other BMX science related questions, make sure to let us know in the comments section. If you're interested, you can look at my YouTube channel right here. I'll put the address right there. And otherwise, thank you, Brant, for having me in your video. Take care.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Patrick, for putting that together for me. Second of all, I hope that this helped you understand the concept of what's going on whenever there's more distance between the brake arm and the rim. The baseball analogy really brings it together. But if it still went over your head a little bit, basically what Patrick is saying is that with the thinner spacers between your brake arm and your brake pad, and the less distance between your brake arm and your rim that comes with these thinner spacers, your brake arms are already part of the way closed, therefore giving you less leverage from pulling the brake lever, which in turn means less force put onto the rim and less friction between the brake pad and the rim itself. And in the end, this gives you a less efficient brake pull and makes you pull the brake lever harder than you would have to if you had a bigger spacer between your brake pad and the rim, giving you a bigger distance between your rim and your brake arm. And similarly to what Patrick said, said toward the end of his segment, this isn't something that's been measured. This is based on years and years of using brakes and trying different things and just seeing what works best. And the way I look at this is that I noticed a difference, and I know a few other people who have noticed a difference. So whether or not that difference is negligible really doesn't matter to me, because when it comes down to it, the difference between a skinny and thicker brake pad spacer between the brake arm and the brake pad has absolutely no effect on the rest of the bike other than the length of brake cable inner that is needed, and it's really not that big of a difference between the two. So there's really no reason not to have things set up in a way that makes sense to make the brakes work better when it doesn't affect anything else on the bike. One other thing that has to do with this concept, and something that I've ran into in the past, is something that we've already mentioned, in that with the thinner brake pad spacers, our brake arms are already closed up a little bit, and because of this, the points of contact between the brake cables and the brake arms, or the straddle cable and the brake arms, are closer together, and on some sets of brakes, this gives us less playroom and less wiggle room to actually pull the brakes and have clearance between the two brake arms. I know with a previous set of brakes that I had, the brake arms were too close together and it left almost no wiggle room, and the brakes had to be set up absolutely perfectly as far as spring tension goes and length of the cables from where the NARP sits on the brake cable and where the brake arm is opened at, because whenever the brakes were pulled, the brake arms would actually rub each other, and whenever they would come back, they wouldn't be able to come back smoothly because they would hit. Now, this isn't an issue with all brakes. For example, the demolition brakes on this bike here, the brake arms are designed so they can't hit whatsoever, but it's something to keep in mind, because with brake arms that are already partially closed and less wiggle room, we have another thing to worry about and another thing that could potentially go wrong and make our brakes more complicated that we can avoid just by using thicker brake pad spacers between the brake arm and the brake pad. With that being said, I hope that you learned something today and found this video useful. I want to end the video by saying thank you again to Patrick Kelly for being involved, putting the time and effort necessary in to make this educational video about bikes for you guys, to hopefully help teach you something and give you something to try on your bikes if you have brakes on them. If you don't and you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching anyways. Check out Patrick's channel. He has a lot of really great educational videos. They're not BMX related, but they're entertaining, and they have the same style from the video that you saw today in them. Not to mention the fact that Patrick is a very great bike rider and a fellow lip lord. I want to thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.